Here's the newspaper account from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, April 22nd, 1890, talking about the Brooklyn-Boston game on the previous day. At the close of the 8th inning, the score stood at 6-1, and an easy victory was almost sure for Brooklyn. But in the 9th inning, O'Brien lost his temper, and Hughes and Collins their heads, that the Bostons were unable to tie the score at the end of the first part of the 9th inning. Then Brooklyn went in and scored the winning run. It was anything but a pleasant game, or a good display of batting, as the hits were mostly flies to the outfield. Who could it be but the Brooklyn Dodgers?
An intensely descriptive eyewitness report of the first victory by Brooklyn's new franchise in the National League. And there were plenty more highlights with the likes of Wee Willie Keeler and Iron Joe McGinnity leading the way through the 90s. On the other hand, the team wasted no time in taking part in a tradition that is still a major part of the game of baseball even today. The manager that first year was a gentleman named Bill McGonigal. He led the Dodgers to a pennant in their inaugural season in the National League. So, of course, he was rewarded by being fired. It makes you wonder if maybe George Steinbrenner is a Dodger history buff. Throughout their early years, the Dodgers were called by many other nicknames, most of which were printable in the morning newspaper. For a while, they were called the Bridegrooms. That bizarre name came after 6 players took wives during one season. When the immortal Uncle Wilbert Robinson took charge, the enlightened newspaper reporters of the day started calling the team the Robins, in deference to the field manager's influence. But the name that kept coming back was the Dodgers. It was a reference to an event that was unique to Brooklyn.
People in Brooklyn, they had a lot of wild-eyed Irish people, don't tell my wife I said that, who used to drive the trolleys. And it was really hazardous crossing the street. And people in Brooklyn were known as the Trolleydodgers. And that was too long a head to put into a one-column head of a paper, so they just changed it to Dodgers.
They've had all these names over the years, the Brooklyn Bridegrooms, the Robins after Wilbert Robinson. To survive in Brooklyn, you had to avoid being hit by a trolley. Therefore, you were a Trolley Dodger, therefore you were a Dodger.
The Dodgers may not have been the best team in baseball in the early 1900s. Most years they weren't even in contention. But that didn't deter their fans. They loved their baseball, a sport that had first been played in Brooklyn even before Abner Doubleday had officially invented the game.
We had baseball in Brooklyn, you know, at the mid-19th century, really, the very beginnings of it, 1850s, 1860s. And Brooklyn, along with New York, was really a center for the development of baseball in the United States. Some of the earliest teams came out of this area, which I think a lot of people don't realize to this day. You know, New York often overshadows Brooklyn, but in actuality, we probably even had, you know, more teams than they did at one time.
Another baseball tradition that has its roots in the history of the Dodgers was the feud. The Dodgers versus the Giants. Back in 1905, Hall of Famer John McGraw was leading his powerful Giant team to their second consecutive pennant. And McGraw liked nothing better than to beat the Dodgers. He especially delighted in humiliating the Brooklynites on their own field.
McGraw was a giant in a full sense of the word. And it was his dominance and his teams that overshadowed everything, you know. And the Dodgers had to fight against that image as well, you know. So it was very tough. And they tell me that way back in the old days, the Giants would come over to Brooklyn in horse-drawn carriages and go to the ballpark, Washington Park, I guess. And the people in Brooklyn despised them so much. They used to throw things down from the rooftops and from the windows and from the little balconies or fire escapes, as we call them in New York, even to the extent where they would be malicious and they would throw the rods from inside an umbrella down on them. You know, I mean, it was really quite a rivalry.
The Dodgers weren't much to contend with on the field in the early 1900s, but off the field, team owner Charles Ebbetts was proving his genius as a baseball man. Ebbetts wasn't a dreamer, but he was a man with a dream. And that dream was a modern ballpark for his Dodgers to play in. Up until this point in their history, the Dodgers had played in various parks in Brooklyn. But Ebbetts found a parcel of land that he pictured as perfect for the new home of the Dodgers.
Ebbetts Field meant a great deal to the borough. It was built in an area called Pigtown. And Pigtown was a garbage dump, really, in essence. And it's funny, I remember teasing Walter O'Malley about that. And I said, isn't it something? In 1913, they opened up Ebbetts Field. And in 1962, you open up Dodger Stadium, and historians could easily say the Dodgers went from one garbage pile to another, because in a sense, Chavez Ravine was a dumping ground, you know.
In 1913, after 4 years of financial wheeling and dealing, the dream came true when the Dodgers opened Ebbetts Field with a victory over the dreaded Giants. The Dodgers had changed managers frequently during their brief history, but the managerial change they made in 1914 kicked off a whole new era in Dodger history. From 1914 to 1931, a colorful character named Wilbert Robinson, Uncle Robbie to the baseball world, was the manager of the Dodgers. But he was more than just a manager. On a team that was Brooklyn, Uncle Robbie was the whole show. In his playing years, Robinson was an all-star catcher. But he was an all-everything as the Dodgers skipper. So it was just natural that when Robinson became their manager, the Dodgers and their antics would be hot copy in the sports pages. It was another stroke of genius by owner Ebbetts. During Uncle Robbie's reign, many outstanding and colorful ball players wore the Dodger uniform. Babe Herman, Dazzy Vance, Brooklyn's son Zach Wheat, and Casey Stengel were just some of the stars and future stars who began with the Dodgers under Robinson. Despite those stars, Uncle Robbie didn't have a lot of talent to work with during his time with the Dodgers. But in 1916, and again in 1920, using mostly cast-offs from other teams, Robinson and the Dodgers were able to win the National League pennant.
The Giants in that year were a much better ball club, man for man, than the Dodgers were, but the Dodgers played well together, and they had the pitching. The pitching was, they had a lot of retreads in many ways, and yet they got them through. That was the year the Giants won, I believe. It was 26 games in a row, which I don't think has ever been broken.
But they fell short in both World Series. In 1916 to a Boston Red Sox team with an outstanding young pitcher named Babe Ruth. In the 1920 series, Tris Speaker and the Indians put an end to Dodger hopes of a baseball championship. But those two winning seasons under Uncle Robbie put a special seal on the love affair between the Dodgers and their fans. In the spring of '25, another Dodger era came to an end. Charlie Ebbetts died after a short illness. And the Dodger family was thrown into complete disarray when another tragedy struck at Ebbetts' funeral.
When Charles Ebbetts died, his heir apparent was Ed McKeever. Ed McKeever stood graveside in the pouring rain, and in those days they had long ceremonies, and then they lowered the coffin into the ground, a very long time. When they went to put the coffin in the ground, it did not fit the grave. This is a true story. The Dodgers, it's all part of the charm of this ball club and this organization. So they had to get the grave diggers to lengthen, widen, and deepen the grave in order to finally send Mr. Ebbetts to his just rewards. But it also took a long time, and Ed McKeever was standing, hat over his heart, in the rain all this time. And to speed up the story, he was the heir apparent. He was trained to take over. He had pneumonia within 3 days and died. So that threw a chaotic franchise into more chaos, if it was all possible. And that, in a sense, had reasons for why things took so long to develop over there.
Logically, the sole remaining original Dodger owner should have taken over as president of the team. But logic and the Dodgers had little in common during the Roaring '20s. And in the irreverent ways of the early Dodgers, Uncle Robbie was the surprise choice to be team president. But his successes on the field didn't carry over into the front office. And when the Dodgers finished in 6th place 4 years in a row, it was time for another change. In 1931, Uncle Robbie was replaced, and one of the most colorful eras in all of Dodger history had come to a close.